Problem number 4. The Professional Organization for Private Colleges and Universities reported that more than 17% of professors attended a national convention in the past year. To test this claim, a researcher surveyed 200 professors and found that 45 had attended a national convention in the past year. At alpha level equal to 0.05, test the claim that this figure is correct. First step is to identify the null and alternative hypotheses. We have the factual statement and the first sentence, so that will be our basis in constructing the null and alternative hypotheses. For the null hypothesis, we have the population proportion is equal to 0.17 since that is the reported numerical values in the factual statement. Next is for the alternative hypothesis. We have the population proportion is more than or greater than 0.17 since in the factual statement it is stated that more than 17% of professors attended a national convention. Second step, we identify the alpha level and the tail test. Alpha level or level of significance is 0.05. And a one-tailed test will be used since the mathematical symbol in the alternative hypothesis is greater than or an inequality symbol. Step 3, identify the statistical test that you're going to use for this given word problem. And since the values given in this problem is in proportion, then automatically this problem is under C-test for proportion. As stated in the problem, we have the statement as surveyed 200 professors and found that 45 had attended a national convention. So, from that statement or from that phrase, we can conclude na that is a proportionality statement, and therefore, this problem is under Z-test for proportion. Step 4 is the computation. We must identify the given values first before we can solve. For the sample proportion, we have the phrase surveyed 200 professors and found that 45 had attended. So that will be our basis for this one. So our x is 45 and the total number of samples is 200. So the sample proportion is 45 over 200. Like what we did in the previous problems, we have to rewrite this fraction form into its decimal form. And its decimal form is 0.23. Next is the population proportion, which is equivalent to 0.17. Next is the value for the Q with the formula 1 minus P. Substituting the value of P, we will have 1 minus 0.17. And simplifying, the value for Q is 0.83. Now that the values are complete, we can now substitute in the given formula for z-test of proportion. Substituting, we will have 0.23 minus 0.17 all over the square root of 0.17 times 0.83 all over 200. For 4-liner calculators, fraction, and then 0.23 minus 0.17 all over the square root of fraction 0.17 times 0.83 all over 200. Then equal sign, that is the answer. For 2-liner calculators, open parentheses, 0.23 minus 0.17, 17. Tapos, close parentheses, fraction symbol, and then open parentheses, tapos square root symbol, and then another open parentheses, 0.17 times 0.83, close, tapos fraction, and then open, no na pala open, 200, and then dalawang close, equal sign. That is the answer. Final answer for the C computed is 2.26. Step 5 is the decision rule. Reject null hypothesis if the absolute value of Z computed is greater than or equal to Z tabular. We already know the Z computed. Next is to get the value for the C tabular. And for us to get the values for the C tabular, we have to go back to our step 2 to identify the alpha level or level of significance and the number of tailed tests. For this problem, we have the alpha level as 0.05 and a one-tailed test. Meaning to say, we have to draw an imaginary vertical line that will pass through 0.05 and an imaginary horizontal line that will pass through one-tailed test. And the intersection of the horizontal and the vertical line is the value for our Z tabular. Now that we have the values for the C computed and Z tabular, we can now substitute. So substituting, the decision rule will be reject null hypothesis if the absolute value of 2.26 is greater than or equal to the absolute value of 1.645. Step 6, identify if we have to reject the null hypothesis or we fail to reject the null hypothesis. To identify if we have to reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis, we have to go back to step 5 and check if the mathematical statement is true or false. So going back, we have 2.26 is greater than or equal to 1.6645. So obviously po, that is true. So we reject the null hypothesis. Next step and last step for this given problem is the conclusion. Since we reject the null hypothesis, the basis for our conclusion is the alternative hypothesis, wherein if you go back to step 1, we have the alternative hypothesis as the population proportion is greater than 17%, or in statement form, we can state it as more than 17% of professors attended a national convention in the past year.